So thank you. Congratulations, students, for making it this far in a very unusual year. So you already get credit and a merit badge for soldiering through this situation. So we're going to introduce ourselves, and co-judges, make sure you're unmuted. I'm Donald Rogers. I'm retired from teaching history and legal history at Central Connecticut State University, and I've been a judge for We the People many, many years. So right next door in Connecticut. So Joe?
Okay, my name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at Clemson University in South Carolina. I saw at least some of your teammates. I can't remember what unit I was on when I judged in the state. It's great to see you again. Had such a good time learning from you that I wanted to come back and talk to you some more. So congratulations on being here, and thanks for all the work you put in.
Well, amen to all of that. I'm Mike Miles from Birmingham. We were talking, Kelly, before Emily brought us over, that the Massachusetts state competition was as beautifully organized and beautifully run as anything you could ever see. But what impressed us the most was that Massachusetts young people are so incredibly bright that Roger could have his grandchildren total up the scores. That was pretty good that they could do that and let y'all know that you won. That was fantastic. We have seen each other before, the three of you and your remarkable teacher, and this is a great way for us to start our day. Thank you.
So students, tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Winberg, and I'm a senior at Easthampton High School.
Hi, I'm Gwyneth Hiller, a senior at Easthampton High School. And I don't know if you remembered, but I was the student who had previously lived in Arkansas back in the state competition.
Right. We even practiced calling the hogs, Gwyneth, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
And hi, I'm Zach Clapp. I'm a senior at Easthampton High School, and this is Kelly Brown, our wonderful teacher.
She sure is.
Good to see. Great. So we're going to proceed now, and we're going to open the competition today, asking you question number 1. So I'll read the question, remind you what it's about, and then we can launch into a very good discussion with you. Question starts with a quotation. Quote, "I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states." Unquote. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review? Please go ahead.
According to Justice Thurgood Marshall, the Constitution did not survive the Civil War. Through the post-war 14th Amendment, the structure of our Constitution dramatically changed, shifting the balance of federalism to one that checks the states and increases federal power, thus expanding judicial review, a power implied in Article 3 and established in Ware v. Hilton for state statutes and Marbury v. Madison for acts of Congress, has significantly limited state power in 3 key ways. First, because states hold massive police powers, they face far more challenges in federal courts. The Supreme Court's use of judicial review has deemed nearly 1,000 state laws unconstitutional compared to about 180 federal laws. Since the 1930s, when the Supreme Court abandoned their efforts to place limits on congressional power, the Supreme Court has affirmed expansive implied congressional powers in the Commerce Clause at the expense of state powers, as seen as early as McCulloch v. Maryland during the pro-business Gilded Age, in Wabash v. Illinois, and most recently in Reich v. Gonzalez.
Third, the addition of the Reconstruction Amendments and subsequently the application of the Bill of Rights to the states through incorporation and the addition of fundamental rights through substantive due process created additional restrictions on state governments, not in exchange for congressional power, but in the expansion of individual rights. The Supreme Court's power of judicial review is at times counter-majoritarian, but in theory, only when the majority acts outside of the bounds of the Constitution and the law. Counter-majoritarian structure can be found in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 3, in the creation of the Senate, and Article 1, Section 10 in the limits placed on the states. They actually spent very little time on Article 3, leaving much of the design and jurisdiction of the courts up to congressional liquidation.
The idea of judicial review as the counter-majoritarian difficulty comes from legal scholar Alexander Bickel in his book The Least Dangerous Branch, titled from Hamilton's words in Federalist 78. Bickel argues that unelected judges nullifying acts created by majority elected legislators undermines democracy and creates an issue of legitimacy for the Supreme Court. The judicial branch being counter-majoritarian is not always a bad thing, as legislators and the people can act against both minority rights and the common good. African Americans endured decades of brutal violence at the hands of sorry at the hands of local and state governments. Federal law allowed for direct discrimination based on sexual orientation. The Supreme Court has used judicial review to protect minority rights in the face of majorities, as seen in NAACP v. Alabama, Brown v. Board of Education, and most recently in Bostock v. Clayton County.
Yet, as constitutional scholar Irvin Chemerinsky argues, the court has often failed at the most important moments to check racist, homophobic, or sexist legislation in cases such as Bowers v. Hardwick or Komaratsu v. United States. Judicial review's counter-majoritarian nature can have quite positive impacts when used as intended, as a check to enforce and uphold the Constitution. That said, the courts have just as often failed to protect rights or even further violated them, so there needs to be better checks on their powers.
Scholars like Akil Amar and Larry Sabato have proposed court rotations and term limits, both of which would not require an amendment. That said, these checks do not limit the power of judicial review. Rather, they provide limitations on the growing politicization of the Supreme Court justices, maintaining the court's position as an independent and sometimes counter-majoritarian body.
One potential check on judicial review is the practice of jurisdiction stripping, as described by Hamilton in Federalist 80 and proposed by professors Ryan Doffler and Samuel Moyne. However, many believe that this would be a dangerous power for Congress to use. We believe judicial review is necessary and that the problem lies less with its ability to counter majorities and more with their decisions being nearly impossible to overturn. The solution cannot be solely to limit the court's power of judicial review, but to amend the amendment process so it's easier for majorities to make the structural changes necessary for modern constitutionalism. Thank you. We're ready for your questions.
Thank you. Very good presentation. Nicely timed. Yeah. You stressed the role of the 14th Amendment, the Reconstruction Amendments, in enhancing judicial authority over state laws. What was the performance of the Supreme Court before the Reconstruction Amendments? Did the Supreme Court actively intervene, against state laws from the Constitution down to the Supreme Court, the Civil War?
I think pre-Civil War, there are some few cases that you'll see come up in which they do kind of have that limit or use that power of judicial review. You see it with McCulloch v. Maryland, them allowing Congress to create the Bank of the United States via the Commerce Clause in Article 1, Section 8. Additionally, you see the Gibbons v. Ogden is a very important case during that pre-Civil War time period. But I think in regards to the 14th Amendment and these judicial review cases, the way that we saw the structure of our federal government dramatically changed past the 14th Amendment. And it's part of the reason why we don't see that much judicial review cases pre-Civil War, because at the time it was still largely seen as a confederation of states. It takes kind of the Civil War to really see us as a unified, we the people, we the United States, rather than the states of the United States. And it allows for the Supreme Court to really take more of an expansion of their powers to start limiting states in benefit of the federal government.
You introduced the idea about rotation of justices. You've also had a very good discussion of kind of pluses and minuses of the counter-majoritarian aspects of the court. If we went to some type of rotation system, however it was devised, what would be the implications for counter-majoritarianism? Would it help that, hurt that? Just link those two concepts for me if you could, please.
I don't think that having the rotations would stop everything about the judicial review being counter-majoritarian. It still is sort of a counter-majoritarian thing, just in the nature of going against these decisions made by the people. But as far as it being harmfully counter-majoritarian, I think that having rotation, something like akin to term limits, could help in making these decisions. I think it's good that we keep the court sort of changing, and that in that change and rotation, that it's sort of helping to encourage them to make decisions that are like for the common good, and like putting like a focus on them just like upholding the Constitution, and sort of, yeah, not trying to make as many as some of the like more harmful decisions we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that by rotating them down to a lower court, it would help just balance things out a little bit and get new people into the court, which, because right now it's just the set number of people that are there and it doesn't really ever change. So I think that by rotating them down, that would help. I also think that we could add more people to the court with court packing, because when it was made, we still have 9 justices, and that's because we had 9 circuit courts. So I think now we have 12. So I think we should add more to get proportional back to that same number. So I think that we should have 12 justices on the court instead, so that we can have 6 Democratic ones and 6 Republican ones to keep it even. And I think that might help a little bit.
I'd like to actually disagree with Liz on some of the logistics of the equal divide for the Supreme Court. I think that making the Supreme Court more partisan than it has already become would be dangerous, especially in our current political atmosphere. I do agree we should add more court justices so it can reflect the 12 regional districts, but it should be done over like a span of maybe like the next 3 executives or so. That way it's more spread out and seems more equal and fair to the citizens of the United States.
If I were an attorney or a judge and a brilliant mind, much less brilliant legal mind, I would not accept a nomination to the Supreme Court, because as Dr. Stewart can tell you, I would not survive the confirmation process. I would not want them going through my background to bring me up for a vote. And I don't even drink beer, and I still wouldn't want to try to go through all of that. Tell us there's got to be a better way to do that. The president probably should get to nominate them, but there's got to be a better thing than this confirmation process that destroys people's lives and beats their reputation up before they even get there. How can we do this better?
Well, a lot of people have proposed having them be elected by the people, which would override that nomination process and also kind of eliminate the consolidation of the executive and the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
which we've seen recently with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, and how they allowed former President Donald Trump to elect somebody near the end of his term, despite having previously not allowed Obama to elect someone during that same time period. So it eliminates some of that partisan politics as well.
But then would they, Gwyneth, would they have to, if they were going to be elected, would a person have to campaign to be on the Supreme Court, or would they be encouraged not to campaign and let someone else espouse their virtues?
You know, that's a really interesting question. And I think that with the issue of campaigning is our Supreme Court is already incredibly partisan. However, if I were to give my own viewpoint on that, I would state that no matter what we do, the Supreme Court is always going to be somewhat partisan.
Yeah.
I think expecting Supreme Court justices to alleviate that bias it's a little like throwing off some of the realities of human nature, I believe.
I think you're right.
I think potentially they could campaign and it would make it partisan, but I'm not sure if that's avoidable. But to combat that, we could have some of the restrictions that people like Akhil Amar and Larry Sabato have suggested, the court rotations and term limits, to make campaigning and those partisan divides more like acceptable and kind of limit that a little bit.
So are there constitutional limits on the power of the federal courts to declare acts of state legislatures unconstitutional? For example, is the 10th Amendment a constitutional limit on federal judicial review of state laws?
I do think there are some constitutional limits to state courts in that regard. The main thing I think of, and this is not necessarily in regards to state courts, But from my Unit 1 knowledge would be that limitation of habeas corpus and how habeas corpus cases, it has to be in relation to the a specific federal or state statute that's in violation for judicial review. So if you look at the Lockyer v. Andrade case, and again, I recognize that this is largely federal, they ruled not in favor of Lockyer because of that particular statute. I think in addition, incorporation, and there are other large limitations to what states can do that affects their process of judicial review, along with precedents.
Okay, did you finish your sentence?
Yes, thank you.
Good, good. Thank you very much. Very good, very good articulate presentation. So you covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate it. You had a nicely laid out introduction. We had a little bit of technical trouble with one of your speeches, and I think I got your points. I like the references to the cases, the authorities, Alexander Bickel. I thought you answered the question well about what did the Supreme Court do before the Civil War. McCulloch and Gibbons are very good, examples. You might have been a little sharper about what they're about. It's Gibbons was the Commerce Clause case, and McCulloch was on a different ground to question the power of Maryland to tax the federal bank. There are other cases you could have mentioned, Fletcher versus Peck. Was another one where you could talk where the Supreme Court, enforced the contract clause, against that state law. Dartmouth College. But overall, very, very nice presentation, and I learned from it.
Wow.
Let me agree with that. I thought you did a superb job with the presentation. Again, you've probably heard me say before that my measure of a good hearing is whether or not I wish we could go on, and that is the case here. Because I would have, my next on this was to press you. You talk about the 14th Amendment and just kind of plopping the 14th Amendment in and how that changed things. And you mentioned incorporation a couple of times, but we don't actually get incorporation for a period of time after the passage of the 14th Amendment, and we do it selectively. And that seems to me to have real implications for the crux of this question. And so I wish we'd had more time to talk about it. The reason we didn't is you gave us all sorts of other interesting ideas. And the idea of, you referred to it as court packing. If you're in favor of it, you give it another name. But the idea of the number of justices matched up to the number of districts is an interesting one, or number of circuits, because Congress controls that also. And you were right to say it's always going to be controversial. The president who had the first issues with Supreme Court appointees was this guy named George Washington. I think we often hearken back to the good old days that never were. The Supreme Court has always been and always will be controversial in some sense, but I'm encouraged that with the level of knowledge you have, that perhaps we'll deal with it more intelligently in the future than we do at some points in history.
Yeah, I love listening to the two of them analyze things. I learned something from them every single time, and I learned something from you this morning. I'm on Central Time here, and Emily, it was only 7:40 a.m. before there was the first mention of an Alabama court case, state of Alabama versus somebody. They came right at me right off the top this morning, and I had no problem. I didn't flinch. They could have picked a lot worse ones than the one they picked, I'll guarantee you. Joe, I wanted to say to you that there's some of us in Alabama that don't have any problem with counter-majoritarianism. We'd be okay with that. That'd be just
I've
fine.
noticed that, yeah.
I got no problem with it. And we've rotated Roy Moore out 4 or 5 times, and he just keeps getting reelected. I'd love to have, I did something I hardly ever do. Gwyneth had answered a question and I directed a follow-up question right back to her, and just because she can speak Southern, which is always helpful when somebody can do Arkansas and Alabama with me. But I'm interested about this bit. I wish what Joe said, I wish we had 30 minutes just to talk about the virtues and disadvantages of if they had to campaign, because in most state courts, they have to. And how do you do that without promising where you're going to come down on an awful lot of things that you're not supposed to have a closed mind about before you get there? And yet we think that putting people through the bruising of the questioning on national television in a Supreme Court case or other appellate court cases, that they're not going to arrive there with a chip on the shoulder one way or another. I'd love to talk with y'all some more about that. I'll close with this, Dr. Rogers. We said in the breakout room, and I don't mind telling you this, that of all the groups to start with today, we were excited about starting with you. We needed to get our eyes open and our mind open pretty early in the day, and we knew the three of you and your remarkable teacher would be the ones to get us going this morning. I did learn from you, and I did enjoy listening to you, and it woke me up. Thank you very much for all your hard work. And Dr. Rogers, this was a pleasure.
And with you, Mr. Miles.